cultural pessimism. Thus, by endlessly portraying fathers as dominant, restrictive, depersonalized, and controlling, the cultural Marxist is able to invalidate the male component of the family unit. Concomitant with this, by endlessly portraying mothers as schizophrenic, nagging, anxious, the cultural Marxist is able to invalidate the female component of the family unit. This two-punch invalidation, endlessly repeated in the general literature, movies, and media, gives rise to a pessimistic attitude towards the traditional family. After time, this pessimism becomes imbued into the culture. That's why it's said the product of critical theory is cultural pessimism. The message of cultural pessimism. 1. Families are boring, stifling, and intrusive. 2. Mothers and fathers suck. 3. Divorce is therefore understandable and justified. With divorce made understandable and justified, even laughingly made easy by calling it no fault, 1 out of 2 nuclear families now disintegrate into chaos.
Most contracts, the court system tries to sustain the contract. If you and I are doing business together and they're trying to protect that contract because the contract was entered into in good faith for good principles. However, although the marriage might have been entered into in good faith, by breaking that, they can put a lot of people to work. Not only the marital courts can go to work, there are also the social workers that go to work. There's also a whole team of people, including the IRS, who prey off of them. And one court in Massachusetts says, we're going to bring this father to his knees and take all of his money from him. So there's a whole movement by the courts to make money off the dissolution of marriage.
After the mother and the father are finally done arguing or negotiating over custody of the children and possession of the assets, 2 new family homes are usually established. He lives here and she lives there. Each new household economy now has to have a redundant, otherwise superfluous set of rent or mortgage payments, energy and utility demands, and household furnishings and accoutrements. Extensive and complex scheduling of child visitation then must be established. If the divorce was acrimonious and/or the children were traumatized by it, and most are, both parents vie for the children's attention and visitation. As they do this, knowingly or unknowingly, they spoil the children with unending material gifts, junk food, sugar, unearned validation, and parental supervision so lenient it borders on gross negligence.
Divorce is dreadful for children, and now you have some families, probably the weakest and the poorest, mostly black families, that are now over 50 and even 60% in divorce, which is critical for the children.
But worst of all, children are usually shipped off to daycare centers and/or public schools, where they are then handled like animals in captivity.
Now we're talking about a school system that's teaching values that's determined not by the parents, not even by the teachers, but by the political groups that provide the funding, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the think tanks, all these invisible structures above. Now, those are the people who are determining the values that are being taught in our schools.
The profligate cultural Marxist society that causes and tolerates this then imposes pharmaceutical drugs on these children.
Certainly the arts have always had a tendency to promote license instead of liberty. The difference between license means that I can do anything, even if it's destructive of other people and of myself. I can take drugs until I OD. I can hurt other people and hurt their children and families. License is something that is selfishness rules. With liberty, what rules is the freedom to be responsible, the freedom to live a decent life, the freedom to love others, the freedom to give. It's like the difference between love and lust. And unfortunately, often the principle of love is replaced in the media with the principle of lust. And the lust principle produces media that's constantly pushing the envelope.
Almost every movie that Hollywood puts out today must depict characters with at least one of the following attributes. 1. The protagonist and/or the antagonist are divorced. 2. The female is portrayed as dominant, controlling, violent, and/or one-up on men. 3. The male is portrayed as aloof, feminine, overly sensitive, and/or cheating. 4. Somewhere in the family, at least one of its immediate members must be a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or a women's liber. Often, attributes are mixed in various proportions, and even mixed with a touch of schizophrenia, as males and females swap roles in fluorescence.
Same-sex marriage does not give you the balance of having a mother and a father so that you can learn different skills from them and you learn different personality types from them. By abolishing that, children are adrift.
Through endless repetition and media dissemination, androgynous elements are institutionalized as legitimate and eventually normal. Cultural pessimism has been taken to a whole new level. Complete tolerance for dysfunctional social structures and inefficient economic units. Proof that Christian values do not work.
Schools should be completely operated by parents. They should be in control, and therefore the parents can determine what values are taught to the students. If the school doesn't teach the values that that parent wants taught to their children, then they can take the child out of that school and put him in another school which does teach those values.
The Supreme Court has been converted into a fighting ally of secularism in the wars against traditionalism in the United States.
With the success of cultural Marxism, hundreds of millions of nuclear families have been destroyed since 1965. This has contributed to, or caused, the decline of the middle class. Next will be the destruction of American capitalism, unless the effects of cultural Marxism are recognized and handled.
There is a revolution coming. It will not be like revolutions of the past. It will originate with the individual and with culture, and it will change the political structure only as its final act.
America is a racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted country. Has a lot of currency here.
A lot of our students, I think, are unconsciously racist.
A few administrators have written to the local papers saying that some of us are racists.
It's not conscious, so they don't really see it in themselves.
People don't have any idea just how bad it is.
Nobody wants to admit that they're unconsciously a racist.
You hear all these things about, the evils of capitalism, blah, blah, blah.
There are still lots of Marxists studying and writing and lots of journals and things within the economics profession.
You never hear about the evils of communism. You never hear about the piles of bodies.
Yeah, imagine your typical very wealthy Bucknell student taking a course which is a critique of capitalism and often saying things like, your parents are doing awful things to people around the globe, either indirectly or directly.
Capitalism oppresses the individual. Marxism would empower the individual.
We go through the basic ideas of Marx and then updates of Marx and some of the feminist and black feminist political economy and black political economy, which kind of starts with Marxism and then goes off in different directions from there.
I'm an econ major. I've never been assigned Hayek. I've never been assigned Mises. I've never been assigned Friedman.
Black political economists and feminist political economists have improved, I think, on basic standard Marxist ideas, and that they expose the fact that Marxist ideas haven't always dealt with race very effectively, for example, or with gender.
I know one person here, ever, that I've met, who has read Friedrich Hayek. One person.
Some of the most cutting-edge work in economics today is being done in feminist economics and in black political economy. So the students should be exposed, you would think, to the cutting-edge work in the discipline.
if you're required to study this stuff about Marxism and you're required to study Marx in this much detail, you know, that is a value judgment.
We feel like they need to be exposed to this. This is really good stuff. This is stuff that they will benefit from learning, but it's going to conflict with their preconceived notions.
I feel like we only get one point of view.
If you were to look through the course book, you'd see across departments there's tons of courses on gender issues, sex issues. You can't just take general history or sociology.
In too many cases, you end up with people who turn a class that is not political and make it political. I believe it was an engineering class of some sort, and it turned into a screed about how George Bush invaded Afghanistan to build an oil pipeline across the country. This was a professor who went on about it for 45 minutes in an engineering class.
You raise your hand and be like, "Excuse me, professor, I disagree with you," in a class where it's out of place already.
I think a lot of it's made up. I think that a lot of the bias is in the eye of the beholder.
It's not every class. Can't forget that, but it's way too often.
These are respected university professors, and they're either controlling our grades or their colleagues are.
I find when students come out of high school, they have no ability to engage in critical thinking. None. They are used to spouting back what teachers tell them.
If everyone here who's in a position of authority and is supposed to be respected is saying these things, then of course it's going to start to sink in.
It's just breathtaking how one-sided things can be here.
Our big danger is the trustees. Our trustees have made noises every now and then about interfering in the curriculum and making sure that we have enough different perspectives.
You ought to want a full flowering of ideas and all viewpoints. It's interesting that so many folks apparently don't.
The chairman of our board of trustees right now, Susan Crawford, has, for example, said at times that we need to make sure that Bucknell has a sufficiently diverse curriculum, and has proposed maybe that we need an American Studies major, implicitly meaning American Studies should be about celebrating America. In other words, it should be a political perspective almost.
Universities used to not be like this. They didn't used to be strongholds of any particular ideological bent.
We were trained in these areas, and to have somebody who does not know our field tell us what we should be teaching is the height of arrogance.
There's flyers up for any leftist cause you can imagine, and they stay up and there's no problem. They don't have to go out 4 or 5 times before an event and repost them. I carried flyers around, and so as I'm walking across campus, if I see flyers where I put them up before, if they're gone, I put it back up, and that was the case with the Multicultural Center. That particular day when I went by, they were gone. Like, they were on a lot of the bulletin boards on campus, so I walked by and went in to post it. The student not so kindly told me I couldn't post it on the bulletin board.
One of the students in there recognized the flyer.
I'd posted flyers in there before. I put 2 flyers in there, and there was no problem.
She confronted Steve and basically told him to take this flyer and go, and if he refused to do so, she would call the police.
You can't post that flyer in here because that flyer is offensive, and we have a right to not be offended.
She mentioned the flyer as being an example of hate speech.
Do you think that people have a right not to be offended?
Nobody has a right to not be offended. I'm offended every day in class when your professors bash my views.
What was her objection?
The content of the flyer, that it was offensive to her. The use of the word plantation.
I just tried to explain to him that this was the title of his book. This is a speaking event. You guys can come. There's a question and answer period. I want people to come. That's why I was posting the flyer.
He wanted to talk to them, and they said, well, if you don't understand why this flyer is offensive to us, we don't have anything to talk about.
They told me to leave. The student said, I'm going to leave or call the police. And she says, no, second thought, I'm calling the police.
There are constructive ways of dealing with that anger, not calling the police on Steve for hanging a flyer.
The police report stated that a young white male was posting racial material. That's what they said, offensive racial material.
It happens to be the title of his book. It's okay to leave the plantation. So it wasn't the flyer per se, it was Mason Weaver's book title on the flyer.
So I left.
He called me very frantically. He said that they had called the police.
The police did actually show up.
He was very upset, and he asked me what he should do.
There's been a complaint against you. You need to come to Judicial Affairs, and they would not tell me what it was. You need to make an appointment for this week to talk to the Director of Judicial Affairs. This is